K9 German Shepherd tries to save something. Locals turn pale when they see it. Max trotted down the cobblestone path, his powerful frame moving gracefully despite his age. His thick, sable fur gleamed under the morning sun, and his ears twitched at the familiar sounds of village life. Children laughed as they chased each other around the old oak tree, and the scent of freshly baked bread wafted from the nearby bakery. It was a peaceful day in River Mist, the kind Max had grown accustomed to since retiring from his duty as a police K9. Here he was more than just a dog. He was a guardian, a friend, and a cherished member of the community. He paused by the marketplace, his dark eyes observing the bustle with practiced vigilance. Even in retirement, Max's instincts remained sharp, his senses attuned to the subtle shifts in his environment. Old habits never died, and for him, safety was always a priority. Anna, the florist, waved at him, her apron dusted with soil and petals. "Good morning, Max," she called, tossing him a small biscuit. He caught it effortlessly, his tail wagging in gratitude. A few children ran over, their small hands eager to pat his head and scratch behind his ears. Max leaned into their touch, his eyes softening as they laughed, their innocence wrapping around him like a warm blanket. As the sun continued its ascent, Max made his way towards the riverbank. It was his favorite spot, a place where he could sit under the shade of the weeping willow and listen to the gentle gurgle of water flowing over smooth stones. The river was calm today, its surface glittering under the sunlight. Max sighed contentedly, lowering himself onto the cool grass, his body finally relaxed. His eyes fluttered shut, but his ears remained alert, twitching at the chirping of birds and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. He was at peace, a guardian finally at rest. But then a faint noise broke through the serenity. Max's ears perked up, his eyes snapping open as he lifted his head. It was distant, almost swallowed by the ambient sounds of nature, but unmistakable. A muffled cry, weak and fragile, carried by the wind. His body tensed, muscles coiling like springs as his senses sharpened. He rose to his feet, nostrils flaring as he sniffed the air, searching for the source. The cry came again, barely audible but laced with urgency. Max's heart quickened, his instincts roaring to life. Danger. Without hesitation, he took off toward the sound, his powerful legs propelling him forward with startling speed. His paws barely touched the ground as he weaved through the trees, his body low and agile. The river's scent grew stronger, mixed with something else, fear. The cry grew louder as he neared the bend in the river, a spot where the currents were known to be treacherous, especially after the recent rains. Max's eyes narrowed, his gaze locking onto a small figure caught in the swirling waters, its fragile form tossed mercilessly by the rapid currents. It was a bundle of cloth, tiny and helpless, bobbing up and down as the river threatened to consume it. But Max's sharp vision caught the slight movement, the tiny arm flailing weakly before disappearing beneath the surface. A baby. Max's body reacted before his mind fully processed the sight. He sprinted towards the water's edge, his heart thundering as adrenaline coursed through his veins. There was no time to bark for help, no time to wait for the villagers. The baby was sinking, swallowed by the angry waves, and only Max stood between it and certain death. With a powerful leap, Max plunged into the water, the icy coldness shocking his body but failing to slow him down. The current was fierce, pulling at his fur, trying to drag him under, but he fought against it with every ounce of strength he had. His legs kicked furiously, muscles burning as he swam towards the bundle, his eyes locked on the fragile form that bobbed dangerously close to the rocks. The baby's cries were weak, muffled by the water as its tiny face appeared and disappeared beneath the churning surface. Max pushed harder, his powerful jaws snapping as he finally reached the bundle, his teeth closing gently around the fabric. The current fought to tear them apart, slamming Max against the rocks as the water roared around them, but he held on, his grip unwavering. Pain shot through his side, a sharp sting from the jagged stones, but he ignored it, focusing only on the child he held in his mouth. The weight was light, too light, and Max's heart clenched as he fought to keep the baby's head above water. His lungs burned as he kicked his legs, his body straining against the force of the current. Inch by inch, he dragged them both towards the shore, his vision blurring as exhaustion threatened to overtake him. But failure was not an option. Max's instincts roared louder than the river, the primal need to protect driving him forward. His paws scraped against the mud as he finally reached the bank, his body collapsing onto the grass as he pulled the baby to safety. His chest heaved, each breath labored and painful, but relief flooded him as the child began to wail, its tiny lungs filling with life. Max's body trembled with exhaustion, his fur soaked and matted, but he stayed close, his nose nudging the baby gently as his heart continued to race. A shout echoed from behind, followed by the pounding of feet as villagers arrived, their faces pale with shock and fear. Max watched through half-lidded eyes as they gathered around, their hands trembling as they lifted the crying baby from the ground. Mothers wept, their arms reaching out to cradle the child, their voices quivering with disbelief. "Who could do this?" someone whispered, horror lacing every word. Max's ears twitched as he listened, his body too weak to move. He could still feel the icy grip of the river, the weight of the tiny life he had fought to save. As the villagers wrapped the baby in blankets, Max's eyes closed, his body surrendering to the exhaustion that weighed him down. But even as darkness claimed him, his heart remained steady, his instincts still vigilant. He had saved the child, defied the river's wrath, and brought hope back to his village. Yet as he drifted into unconsciousness, a cold shiver ran through him, a whisper of dread that crept beneath his fur. Someone had abandoned that child by the river, left it to die. And whoever they were, Max knew they were still out there, hiding in the shadows, waiting to strike again. Max awoke to the sound of hushed voices and the gentle warmth of sunlight on his fur. His body ached, muscles sore from the battle against the river's unforgiving current. As he opened his eyes, the familiar sight of the village square came into focus, surrounded by worried faces and the scent of dried mud clinging to his coat. Children stood nearby, their eyes wide with admiration and fear, whispering to each other about the hero dog who had saved the baby from the river. Max's ears twitched, his body tense as the memory of the freezing water and the tiny, fragile life surged through his mind. The baby. Was it safe? He lifted his head, ignoring the pain that shot through his side, and scanned the crowd. His sharp eyes locked onto the group of women gathered near the fountain, their arms cradling the small bundle wrapped in blankets. The baby was safe, its cries loud and strong as the villagers fussed over it, their faces pale with disbelief. Relief flooded Max's chest, easing the tightness that had gripped him since he first heard those muffled cries by the riverbank. He watched as Anna, the florist who always greeted him with a smile, gently rocked the baby, her eyes glistening with tears. "It's a miracle," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Who would leave a child like this?" Max's ears perked up, his instincts humming with unease. He knew danger when he sensed it, and the scent clinging to the baby was laced with fear and desperation. Someone had abandoned that child, left it to the mercy of the raging river, and Max's heart tightened with anger. He rose to his feet, his body swaying slightly as exhaustion threatened to pull him back down. But he couldn't rest. Not when the danger still loomed, hidden beneath the surface like the currents that had nearly claimed the baby's life. His eyes flicked towards the trees lining the edge of the village, their branches swaying in the breeze, shadows dancing across the ground. Whoever had done this was still out there, watching, waiting. A firm hand settled on his head, snapping Max out of his thoughts. It was Thomas, the blacksmith, his rugged face softened by a look of gratitude. "Good boy, Max," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved that child's life today." Max leaned into the touch, his eyes never leaving the tree line, muscles tense beneath his fur. Thomas followed his gaze, his brow furrowing. "You sense something, don't you?" he asked, his tone low and cautious. Max huffed, his ears flattening as his tail stiffened. Danger. It was still there, lurking just beyond the safety of the village. Before Thomas could ask more, a commotion erupted near the fountain. A woman's scream sliced through the air, raw with anguish and fear. Max's head snapped toward the sound, his body moving before his mind registered what was happening. The crowd parted as a young woman stumbled forward, her eyes wide with horror as she reached out, her fingers trembling. "Grace!" she cried, her voice breaking as she collapsed in front of Anna, her hands clutching at the bundle. "My baby! My Grace!" Her body shook with sobs, her face pale, as she frantically unwrapped the blankets, her eyes searching the tiny face nestled within. The villagers gasped, shock rippling through the crowd as they realized who she was. Emma, the quiet girl who lived by the edge of the forest, barely seen since her marriage to Samuel, the woodsman. Max watched as Anna gently helped Emma to her feet, her arm wrapped protectively around the trembling woman's shoulders. How did she end up in the river? Emma's voice wavered, her eyes filled with terror as she looked at the faces surrounding her. I, I woke up and she was gone. Samuel said she was with me all night. Her words faltered, her body swaying as she clutched Grace tighter, shielding the infant from unseen dangers. Whispers spread through the crowd, suspicion weaving its way into their hearts. Max's ears flattened as he watched their faces change, their sympathy twisting into doubt. How could she not know her own child was missing? Someone murmured, their voice laced with accusation. Where was Samuel? Another asked, eyes narrowing. Why didn't he search for his own daughter? The questions hung heavy in the air, feeding the unease that coiled in Max's chest. He took a step closer, his body angled protectively towards Emma and Grace, his gaze sweeping over the villagers as he growled softly. He had seen this before, the way fear could twist people's minds, turning friends into enemies. Emma's shoulders shook as she looked around, her face pale with panic. I swear, I didn't know, she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. I would never hurt my baby. I love her. Her words were desperate, pleading for understanding, but the crowd's murmurs grew louder, their faces hardening with suspicion. Max's fur bristled, his growl deepening as he moved to stand beside Emma, his body a barrier between her and the growing hostility. He wouldn't let them turn on her, not when the true danger was still out there, hidden beneath layers of deception. Then a voice cut through the noise, calm and steady. Enough! The crowd fell silent, their heads turning as Victor stepped forward, his presence commanding and serene. The village elder's face was etched with lines of wisdom, his silver hair gleaming under the sunlight as he approached Emma, his eyes kind and understanding. This is not the time for blame, he said, his voice gentle but firm. A child was saved today, thanks to Max's bravery. We must be grateful and protect each other, not tear ourselves apart. His words eased the tension, the villagers bowing their heads in shame. Max watched Victor closely, his eyes narrowing. Something about the elder's calm demeanor felt wrong, like the deceptive stillness of water before a storm. Victor reached out, his hand resting on Emma's shoulder, his smile warm and fatherly. You should rest, he told her softly. I'll make sure you and Grace are safe. Emma nodded, relief flooding her face as she allowed herself to lean on Victor's strength. Max's tail flicked, his body rigid as he watched them leave. Victor guiding Emma and Grace away from the crowd, his arm protectively around them. But Max's instincts refused to calm, his growl vibrating low in his throat as Victor glanced back, his eyes meeting Max's for the briefest moment. They were cold, calculating, and a shiver ran down Max's spine as the elder's smile curled just slightly at the edges. It was the smile of a predator who had just marked his prey. Max's fur stood on end, his body tense as he watched them disappear into the distance. The true danger was closer than anyone realized, and it wore the face of the man they trusted most. Max's body moved through the village with purpose, his paws silent against the cobblestones as he followed the scent trail winding through the narrow alleys. Victor's scent was easy to distinguish, a mix of cedarwood and smoke, tinged with something bitter that made Max's nose twitch. It led towards the old chapel at the edge of the village, a place rarely visited except by the elder himself. Max's fur bristled, a low growl rumbling in his chest as his instincts screamed of danger. He knew he was disobeying the rules by trailing the elder, but the memory of Victor's cold, calculating eyes haunted him, a predator's gaze hidden behind a mask of benevolence. Max wouldn't rest until he uncovered the truth. The path grew narrow as the chapel came into view, its stone walls crumbling with age, vines curling around the cracked windows. Max crouched low, his body hidden behind the bushes, as he watched Victor's silhouette moving inside, his form flickering behind the stained glass. Max's ears twitched, catching the faint murmur of voices from within. He crept closer, his movements fluid and silent, his body pressed against the cold stone as he listened intently. Victor's voice was a low, menacing growl, stripped of its usual warmth and wisdom. "You failed me," he hissed, his tone laced with anger. "I gave you one task, and you couldn't even do that right." A second voice responded, shaky and fearful. I, I didn't think the dog would be there. He was supposed to be retired." Max's eyes narrowed, his body rigid as he recognized the voice. Samuel, Emma's husband. The scent of fear was heavy in the air, mingling with the bitterness that clung to Victor. Max's heart thudded painfully against his ribs as realization sank in. Samuel had been at the river, and it wasn't by accident. Max's muscles tensed, his instincts urging him to leap through the window and confront the man who had abandoned his own child. But he stayed still, ears straining to catch every word. Victor's voice grew colder, his footsteps echoing against the chapel's stone floor. "I trusted you to handle this discreetly. No one was supposed to find her. Certainly not that wretched dog." There was a pause, the air heavy with tension. "You know what the prophecy says, don't you? A child born under the crescent moon, destined to bring ruin to the village unless the curse is broken before her first breath. That baby is an omen, and you were supposed to end it before it could destroy us all." Max's heart stopped, his mind reeling. A prophecy? A curse? He struggled to comprehend the words, his instincts warring with the confusion that clouded his thoughts. Grace? An omen? It made no sense. She was just a baby, innocent and helpless. How could she be a threat? Samuel's voice broke through his turmoil, weak and trembling. I thought it was just a story. I didn't want to believe it. But you said if I did this, the nightmares would stop. That Emma would be safe." His voice cracked, anguish woven into every word. "I couldn't lose her. I thought I was protecting my family." Max's growl deepened, his lips curling back to reveal sharp teeth. Coward. The man had been willing to sacrifice his own child, blinded by fear and superstition. Max's body trembled with anger, his fur bristling as he fought to stay hidden. Victor's laugh echoed coldly, void of any humanity. "You were protecting yourself," he sneered. "You were too weak to defy the curse, too afraid to face the truth. That child is a danger to us all, and if you had done as I instructed, this would all be over. But now..." His footsteps moved closer, the sound sharp and deliberate. "Now we have to clean up your mess." Max's eyes followed the shadowy figures moving towards the back of the chapel, his heart pounding as he realized their intent. They were planning something, a second attempt to get rid of Grace, and this time, there would be no mistakes. Without a sound, Max slipped away from the chapel, his body moving swiftly through the shadows. His mind raced, piecing together the fragments of the conversation, his instincts driving him forward. He needed to reach Emma before Victor did. He had to protect Grace, no matter the cost. Max's paws pounded against the earth as he ran, his body a blur of speed and power, weaving through the trees towards Emma's cottage. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the ground. But Max didn't slow, his heart thundering as the scent of fear grew stronger. The cottage came into view, its windows aglow with warm light. Max's ears picked up the soft hum of Emma's lullaby, drifting through the open window, her voice soothing as she rocked Grace to sleep. Relief flooded his chest, but it was short-lived as his nose caught a familiar, bitter scent. Victor. He was already here. Max's body lowered, his muscles coiling as he circled the cottage, his eyes sharp and calculating. The back door was slightly ajar, the wood creaking softly as the wind pushed against it. Max's hackles rose, his growl rumbling low as he crept closer, his senses alert. He moved inside, his body hugging the walls as he navigated the dark hallway, the scent of smoke and cedar growing stronger. Voices echoed from the nursery, cold and sinister. "It's for the good of the village, Emma. Victor was saying, his tone gentle but laced with malice. You must understand, that child is cursed. If we don't break the cycle, she will bring nothing but pain and suffering. Emma's voice was hoarse, trembling with fear. No, no, you're lying. She's my daughter. She's just a baby. Her words were choked with tears, her body shielding Grace as Victor loomed over her. Max's vision turned red, his muscles tightening as he prepared to lunge. But then he heard the creak of the floorboards behind him, the faintest whisper of movement. He spun just as Samuel's figure emerged from the shadows, his face pale and drawn, eyes hollow with guilt. Max's growl deepened, his body blocking the doorway as he bared his teeth, daring Samuel to take another step. But the man hesitated, his shoulders sagging as he looked at his wife and child, pain etched into every line of his face. Emma, I'm sorry. I thought I was saving you. His voice broke, his hands trembling as he reached out. I didn't know. I didn't understand. Please, forgive me. Max's heart wavered, his body torn between anger and pity. But there was no time for forgiveness, not when Victor was still there, his eyes gleaming with predatory intent. The elder's face twisted with fury as he turned to Samuel, his voice sharp and commanding. Fool, if you won't finish this, then I will. He lunged towards Emma, his hands reaching for Grace. But Max was faster, his body launching forward, his growl a roar of fury as his jaws closed around Victor's arm, his teeth sinking deep as he dragged the man to the ground. The fight was on, and Max would protect Grace with his life. Victor's scream shattered the air, his body twisting as he fought against Max's iron grip. Max's teeth were buried deep in the elder's arm, his powerful jaws clamped down with unwavering force. Victor's free hand struck at Max's head, fingers clawing desperately, but Max didn't flinch. His growl vibrated through his entire body, a low, menacing rumble that spoke of fury and protection. This man had tried to harm Grace, had tried to destroy an innocent life, and Max would make him pay. He tightened his bite, feeling the elder's resistance weaken as pain rippled through Victor's body. Victor's face contorted with rage, his eyes blazing with hatred as he tried to break free. You filthy mutt, he spat, his voice dripping with venom. You don't understand. That child is cursed. She'll bring ruin to us all. Max's ears flattened, his growl deepening as he yanked Victor off his feet, throwing him to the floor with a force that rattled the walls. Victor hit the ground hard, the air leaving his lungs in a ragged gasp. He struggled to get up, but Max stood over him, his body tense and ready, eyes gleaming with warning. If Victor tried to move, he would strike again, faster and harder. Behind him, Emma's sobs filled the room, her arms wrapped protectively around Grace as she sank to her knees. Her face was pale, eyes wide with terror as she looked from Max to Victor, disbelief written in every line of her expression. How could you? She choked, her voice trembling. You were supposed to protect us. You were supposed to guide us. Victor's face twisted, a sneer curling his lips. Foolish girl, he hissed, his gaze flicking to Grace with contempt. That creature is a harbinger of death. If she lives, the prophecy will come true, and we will all suffer. I did what had to be done. Max's snarl cut through the room, sharp and furious. He took a step forward, his fur bristling as he loomed over Victor, teeth bared. The elder recoiled, his confidence wavering under Max's relentless glare. For the first time, Victor's eyes showed fear. He scrambled backward, his body pressing against the wall as Max advanced, his growl a promise of vengeance. Victor's breath came in short, panicked bursts, his hands trembling as he tried to ward off the imposing German shepherd. Stay back! Stay away from me! He stammered, his voice cracking. But Max did not waver. He would show no mercy to the man who threatened Grace's life. Then a movement from the corner of the room caught Max's attention. Samuel stood frozen, his face pale and haunted, eyes locked on his wife and child. His shoulders slumped, shame and guilt radiating from him as he took a hesitant step forward. Emma, I didn't know, he whispered, his voice breaking. I was trying to protect you, to protect all of us. Victor told me. He said it was the only way. Tears slid down his face, his hands shaking as he reached out, only to pull back, the weight of his actions crashing down on him. I was weak. I believed his lies. I almost, I almost lost you both. Emma's gaze softened, her tears flowing freely as she looked at the man she had loved, now broken and lost. She held Grace closer, her body trembling as she whispered, "You were supposed to protect her, not abandon her, not leave her to die." Her words pierced Samuel's heart, his face crumpling as he fell to his knees, his body racked with sobs. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I was a coward." His hands covered his face, his shoulders shaking with grief and remorse. Max watched, his body still tense, ready to strike if Samuel made a wrong move. But there was no danger here, only a man consumed by his own guilt. Victor's eyes narrowed, his lips curling in disgust. "Pathetic," he spat, his voice dripping with disdain. "You let your weakness control you. You could have been free of that curse, but you chose love over survival. Fool." His words were sharp, filled with malice as he tried to rise, his arm hanging limply where Max had bitten him. "You've doomed us all." Max's growl deepened, his body tensing as he prepared to lunge. But before he could move, a figure appeared in the doorway, blocking Victor's escape. Thomas stood there, his face grim and eyes blazing with anger. "I heard everything," Tomas said, his voice cold and steady. "The prophecy, the lies. You manipulated us. You turned us against an innocent child to save yourself." His fists clenched, his body rigid with fury. "You made us believe she was cursed. You preyed on our fear." Victor's face paled, his confidence crumbling as the blacksmith took a step forward, his presence commanding and fierce. "I trusted you," Thomas continued, his voice hardening. "We all did, and you tried to kill a baby, a child who did nothing wrong. You are the curse, Victor. You poisoned this village with your deceit." Victor's mouth opened, his lips forming excuses, but no sound came out. His eyes flicked toward the window, calculating his chances of escape. But Max growled low, his body blocking any path to freedom. There was no escape, not this time. Victor's shoulders sagged, defeat washing over him as he sank to the floor, his head bowed. "It was for the greater good," he muttered, his voice hollow. "I did what was necessary." But his words fell on deaf ears. Tomas turned his back, his shoulders rigid as he spoke. "You did what was selfish, and you will face justice for your crimes." Max's body relaxed, his tail lowering as he stepped back, his eyes never leaving Victor. He watched as Thomas bound the elder's hands, his movements swift and precise. The danger was over, the threat contained. But as the adrenaline faded, Max's body trembled, exhaustion crashing over him. He limped towards Emma, his head low as he nuzzled her leg, his eyes soft and gentle. She looked down, her face breaking into a tearful smile as she knelt beside him, her hand stroking his fur. "Thank you, Max. You saved us," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Grace stirred in her arms, her tiny hand reaching out, fingers brushing against Max's nose. He sniffed her curiously, his heart swelling with a warmth he had never known. This child, so small and innocent, had been hunted by fear and superstition. Yet she had survived, protected by love and loyalty. Max knew his duty wasn't over. He would watch over her, protect her from harm, and guard her future. Grace's fingers curled around his fur, her eyes bright and curious as she gazed at him with wonder. Max's heart swelled with purpose, his exhaustion fading as he leaned into her touch. He was her guardian now, and nothing would ever hurt her again. The morning sun bathed river mist in golden light, its warm rays chasing away the shadows of the previous night. The village buzzed with whispers, the news of Victor's betrayal spreading like wildfire. Faces once filled with admiration for the elder, now twisted with disbelief and anger. Max moved through the crowd, his powerful body weaving between villagers as they gathered outside the chapel, their voices low and troubled. He watched as Thomas stood before them, his stance firm and resolute, his voice carrying the weight of truth. "Victor deceived us all," Thomas declared, his eyes blazing with conviction. He exploited our fears and turned us against the innocent. He tried to kill Grace, using superstition to justify his cruelty. A murmur of shock rippled through the crowd, heads turning as people exchanged stunned glances. Mothers clutched their children closer, their eyes wide with horror. Max's ears twitched, his body tense as he watched their faces shift from confusion to anger. He could feel the weight of their guilt, the shame that settled heavy in their hearts. They had believed Victor's lies, allowed fear to cloud their judgment. Max's gaze moved to Emma, who stood at the edge of the crowd, cradling Grace protectively against her chest. Her face was pale, eyes red from sleepless nights and tears, but her shoulders were square, her chin lifted defiantly. She was no longer the broken woman who had fallen to her knees in despair. She was a mother, fierce and unwavering, ready to defend her child. Tomas continued, his voice steady as he recounted Victor's plot, the false prophecy he had crafted to manipulate Samuel. Gasps echoed as the truth unraveled, the villagers recoiling as they realized the depth of Victor's deceit. He preyed on our fears, Thomas said, his jaw tightening. He convinced us that Grace was cursed, that she would bring ruin to us all. But the only curse here was his greed, his hunger for power and control. Max growled softly, his hackles rising as he remembered Victor's cold eyes. The way he had looked at Grace as if she were nothing more than a burden to be discarded. The memory ignited a fire in Max's chest, his protective instincts flaring as he moved closer to Emma, his body a shield between her and the crowd. A voice broke through the silence, trembling with guilt. We almost believed him. It was Anna, her hands clasped over her mouth, eyes brimming with tears. We almost turned against an innocent child. Her shoulders shook, tears spilling down her cheeks. But then, one by one, they stepped forward, their heads bowed in apology. "Forgive us, Emma," an elderly man murmured, his hands trembling as he wiped his eyes. "We were fools, and we should have protected you." A woman placed a gentle hand on Emma's shoulder, her face contorted with regret. "We let fear blind us. We believed his lies because we were too afraid to seek the truth." Emma's lip quivered, her grip tightening around Grace as she looked at their faces, her eyes softening. "I was afraid too," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I was afraid of losing Grace, of losing Samuel, and I almost did because of his lies." Her shoulders shook, tears slipping down her cheeks as she looked at Max, her eyes filled with gratitude. "But Max saved us. He saved us all." Max's tail lowered, his ears flattening as he looked away, embarrassment heating his fur. He hadn't done it for praise or recognition. He had done it because it was right, because protecting the innocent was in his blood, woven into every fiber of his being. The villagers turned to him, their faces softening with admiration and respect. "Max is a hero," Thomas said, his voice proud. "He saw the truth before any of us did, and he fought to protect it." Applause erupted, a wave of gratitude washing over Max as they called his name, their voices filled with awe. But Max's eyes remained on Emma and Grace, his heart thudding as he watched Grace's tiny hand curl around her mother's hair, her innocent eyes blinking up at the world that had almost destroyed her. The crowd began to disperse, their hearts heavy, but their spirits lighter, a sense of hope blooming as they pledged to rebuild the trust Victor had shattered. Tomas approached Emma, his expression gentle. "He'll face justice," he promised, his voice firm. "I'll make sure of it." Emma nodded, her body relaxing as she looked at Grace, her fingers brushing against her daughter's soft cheek. "She deserves to grow up safe, to be loved without fear." Her voice wavered, eyes shimmering as she looked at Max. "And she deserves to know the one who saved her." She knelt, holding Grace out towards Max, her smile warm and inviting. "Meet your guardian, Grace, the bravest soul in River Mist." Max's breath hitched, his body frozen as Grace's bright eyes locked onto his, her tiny fingers reaching out, curiosity sparkling in her gaze. He took a hesitant step forward, his heart pounding as he lowered his head, his nose brushing against her hand. Her touch was soft, gentle, her fingers curling around his fur, her giggle like music as she grabbed his ear. Max's tail wagged, his heart swelling as warmth flooded him, a joy so profound it made his chest ache. He leaned into her touch, his eyes closing as he nuzzled her hand, a promise echoing in his heart. He would protect her, always. Emma laughed, her eyes crinkling as she watched them, relief and gratitude washing over her. "You were her miracle," she whispered, her voice tender. "You brought her back to me. You gave me my heart again." Max looked up, his gaze meeting Emma's, his eyes shining with understanding. He had saved Grace from the river, but she had saved him too, given him a purpose, a reason to keep fighting. As the sun climbed higher, its light warm and golden, Max stood beside Emma and Grace, his heart full and his resolve unbreakable. This was his family now, his pack, and he would protect them with his life. The shadows of fear were gone, replaced by hope and love. Max looked out over river mist, his eyes sharp and vigilant. The village was safe for now, but if danger ever returned, he would be ready. He would always be ready. Seasons changed in river mist, the golden leaves of autumn giving way to winter's icy breath, then to spring's gentle bloom. Through it all, Max remained steadfast, his watchful eyes never straying far from Grace. He guarded her as she learned to walk, her tiny feet stumbling over uneven cobblestones, her laughter ringing like bells as she reached for his fur to steady herself. He shadowed her as she explored the village, her curiosity leading them on grand adventures through meadows and along the riverbank where their story began. Max never let her wander too close to the water, his body instinctively blocking her path, his protective instincts still sharp and unwavering. The villagers watched this bond grow with awe, their respect for Max deepening with each passing day. Children adored him, their hands gentle as they patted his back, their laughter blending with Grace's as they played in the square. Mothers offered him scraps from their kitchens, treats he always accepted graciously before returning to his post beside Grace. The whispers of curses and prophecies had long since faded, replaced by admiration and gratitude. To them, Max wasn't just a dog. He was a guardian angel, a hero who had protected their future. Spring's blossoms gave way to summer's warmth, and Grace's tiny steps became sure and swift. She ran with the village children, her giggles echoing as Max chased her, his powerful legs moving with a grace that belied his age. His heart swelled each time she called his name, her voice bright and full of love. "Max!" she'd shout, her arms reaching for him as she stumbled into his waiting embrace. He would lower his head, letting her wrap her small arms around his neck, her cheek pressed against his fur. Those moments were his treasures, his purpose made real. He would protect her, always. Yet shadows remained, memories of Victor's betrayal lurking at the edges of Max's mind. The elder had been banished, his influence shattered by truth and justice. But Max's instincts never rested. His vigilance never wavered. He could still feel the darkness that had tried to consume Grace, the fear that had poisoned her family. Sometimes late at night, he would prowl the edges of the village, his eyes glowing in the moonlight as he watched the forest, ears perked for the faintest sound of danger. He would return to the cottage only when satisfied that all was safe, curling up beside Grace's crib, his body a fortress against unseen threats. As summer waned, a festival was planned, a celebration of life and renewal. The village square was adorned with ribbons and lanterns, their colors vibrant against the twilight sky. Music filled the air, laughter bubbling from every corner as people danced and feasted, their faces bright with joy. Grace's eyes sparkled as she toddled through the crowd. Max at her side, his body a steady presence as she navigated the bustling square. She wore a wreath of flowers on her head, petals tumbling into her golden hair, her smile radiant as she reached for Max, her fingers curling into his fur. Emma watched from a distance, her heart swelling with love as she saw her daughter's happiness, her laughter lifting the weight of past sorrows. Thomas approached, his face warm and open as he stood beside her. "She's growing stronger every day," he said, his eyes never leaving Grace. "And she's safe, thanks to Max." Emma nodded, her throat tightening. "He saved us both," she whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. "I don't know how I'll ever repay him. Tomas's gaze softened, his hand resting on her shoulder. "You already have," he said. "You gave him a purpose, a family." A shout of laughter broke through their conversation, drawing their attention to Grace as she ran towards the oak tree, her legs pumping with excitement. Max was at her side, his tail high, his eyes shining as he kept pace, his body angled protectively. Grace stumbled, her balance faltering, but Max was there, his shoulder steadying her before she could fall. She looked up at him, her face breaking into a beaming smile as she threw her arms around his neck, her voice filled with pure adoration. "Max! My Max!" she exclaimed, her laughter bubbling as she buried her face in his fur. Max's chest swelled, his heart thundering as he leaned into her embrace, his nose nuzzling her cheek. She was his everything, his reason for breathing. Her joy was his strength, her safety his purpose. He would guard her until his last breath, until his body could no longer move. Max closed his eyes, his heart brimming with love, as he savored the warmth of her touch, the innocence of her laughter. This was his life now. This child, this family, this village. He was home. As dusk deepened, the villagers gathered beneath the lanterns, their faces glowing in the soft light. Music filled the air, voices rising in song as they celebrated the blessings of life and love. Emma lifted Grace into her arms, her smile tender as she kissed her daughter's cheek. "Time to rest, my little miracle," she murmured, her voice soft. Grace's eyelids drooped, her tiny body curling into Emma's warmth as she yawned, her fingers still tangled in Max's fur. Max walked beside them, his head low, his movements slow and graceful as they made their way home. The cottage was warm and quiet, the shadows soft as Emma laid Grace in her crib, her fingers brushing through her daughter's hair. Max settled beside the crib, his body curled protectively around its base, his eyes watching Grace as she slept, her breathing even and peaceful. Emma knelt beside him, her hand resting on his head as she whispered, "You gave me my heart back. You saved my soul." Her tears fell softly, her gratitude a living, breathing thing. "You are our guardian, our hero." Max closed his eyes, his body relaxing under her touch, his heart beating steadily as he listened to Grace's soft breaths. The night was still, the air cool as the moon watched over them, its light silver and serene. Max's eyes grew heavy, his body warm and content as sleep claimed him. He dreamed of sunlight and laughter, of Grace's tiny hands reaching for him, her voice calling his name with love. He dreamed of a future where she grew strong and brave, her spirit unbroken and free. And he knew he would be there, always watching, always protecting. His purpose was clear, his heart full. Max was more than a guardian. He was family. And as long as Grace needed him, he would never leave her side. This story reminds us of the incredible bond between humans and animals, showing that loyalty, love, and courage can overcome even the darkest of fears. Max's unwavering devotion protected Grace from harm, proving that heroes come in all shapes and sizes, sometimes on four legs. It also teaches us the importance of seeing beyond fear and superstition, urging us to seek truth and trust in love, rather than giving in to ignorance and prejudice. Through Max's bravery and Emma's resilience, we learn that family isn't just about blood. It's about those who stand by us, fight for us, and love us unconditionally. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to give the video a thumbs up and share it with others. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring tales of hope, courage, and the extraordinary bonds that shape our lives. We appreciate your support, and we can't wait to bring you more stories that move and inspire. See you in the next video.